Hi, I'm Chris McLean from Stonechair Capital. Earlier, I had the opportunity to sit down with Bimbola Adisa of Beacon Power Services and hear how data collection in the utility sector is driving efficiency and profitability in Nigeria. Let's dive into that discussion with Bim of Beacon Power Services and learn more about energy and Africa.
Well, thanks for all joining us today. I appreciate everybody's participation here. And I've got another wonderful guest here that is definitely boots on the ground in Western Africa. He's living the dream every day. I'd like to introduce you to Bimbola Adisa. I'd like to introduce you to Bimbola Adisa and his company, Beacon Power Services. Bim, can you tell us a little bit about your company and what you're doing in Nigeria?
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Chris. Appreciate the opportunity. My name is Bim, as you said. My company, Beacon Power Services, we developed software, grid management software, and we provide data analytics. And the whole idea is to harness data and provide tools to basically improve the grid and improve availability of electricity, not just in Nigeria, although our primary operations are in Nigeria currently, but across Africa.
That is an interesting task to take on. I was looking earlier today at the rates of production versus the rate of usage, because as you well know, they're published by the utility on a daily basis. And, we're still running at, 50 to 40% usage versus what is actually being produced. How are you including that ratio for the people in Nigeria that, there's a spread between the utility, what the utility can produce and what is actually being used? How do you affect that?
Actually, I'll take it one step further.
All right.
Right. So you've got what is being produced, and like you rightly said, or you've got production capacity. Of that production capacity, about 40 to 50% is actually produced, right? But of what is produced, only about half of that gets to the consumer, right? So by the time you get from production capacity to the consumer, there's a 75% gap. And really what Beacon does is to plug not the first 50%, because we don't produce electricity, but to plug that 25% that additional 25% that doesn't get to the consumer, right? Because that number is only going to grow. If you double your production, the magnitude of that number is going to grow. So really, our goal is to provide visibility that, look, you've got 25% of grid capacity here that's produced, not getting to the consumer. Where is that happening, and how can we ensure that actually does get to the consumer and is properly accounted for?
So the way I was looking at the statistics, it's that 47% of people in Nigeria don't have access. 78% only have 12 hours of access, and that's producing $14 billion annually in alternative energy, diesel generation. Let's call a spade a shovel. 78% have less than 12 hours, and they're running on diesel generation.
So
where do you provide the value metric then?
Again, great point and great statistic. Our focus is on the 78%, because those 78% live in cities like we do anywhere else, in New York, Toronto, Vancouver, in major cities, right? Mm-hmm. These are densely populated urban areas where land is a premium, right? So it's tough to kind of have space for, we think renewables make sense, but in those cities, it's hard to kind of find the space. The roof capacity is limited, right? And again, our goal is to say, look, why do these 78% have less than 12 hours? Because half of the power that's sent to the grid doesn't get to them, right? If we can alleviate that, they get more. If they get more, then they're using diesel less mean, so if you take someone who's getting power 10 times a day, right? Let's take a hotel operator.
Okay.
Right? You're operating hotels. You don't want to pay for a hotel and not have hot water or not have air conditioning or not have lights. So it's a 24/7 operation, or a hospital, right? If you're getting 10 hours a day, that means 14 hours of that day, you're burning diesel to just make up for your gap. So our goal, like I said, is by providing visibility that, look, this is where there is leakage in the grid. This is where there are outages in real time, right? This is where there's something that's gone wrong. And by plugging that gap, if we can increase that from 10 to 12 to 14, then we're directly reducing their diesel consumption, because every incremental hour of electricity they get means an hour less of diesel they're burning, right?
Yeah.
So that's a direct correlation, a direct contribution. And frankly, from my perspective, I think, rightly so, we're in an age where the climate crisis is front and center pretty much everywhere, right? But unless we fix this problem in Africa, it's a massive, massive issue, right? Again, the economies are growing, the need for electricity is increasing. Unless that leakage is plugged, it's going to become an increasing problem, right? So that 14 billion in diesel is only going to grow unless we fix the grid. And we can't fix the grid if there's no visibility on the grid. So what BPS does is we deploy sensors in the grid that monitor the flow of electricity. The sensors allow us to spot outages when they happen. They allow us to spot leakages when they happen, be it technical, commercial, or other leakages, right? And we can, because it's a tool, the utility can see in real time what is going on and they can respond immediately. I can give an example, right? So you have a neighborhood where, take the hotel I mentioned for illustrative purposes. They're supplied by a transformer, right? That transformer supplies the hotel and 99 other homes, right? All of a sudden, someone adds 20 more homes to that to that transformer, and it's overloaded. It explodes, poof, right? Nobody knows. It's possible that nobody could find out for weeks, right? You're still sending electricity there, but there's no end user, right? The end user is just burning diesel, thinks, oh, here we go again. The utility is just, they're not providing electricity again, but they are, right? The utility is losing revenue because the power gets to the transformer, but there's no end user, right? The consumer is unhappy, the utility is unhappy. What BPS does is we provide visibility on that. So we can tell you before it gets overloaded that, hey, Mr. Utility, you may have a problem here. You need to start moving people off this transformer because it's going to get overloaded. And then if it does get overloaded and it goes poof, you can then need to hey, this is where there's a leakage right now. If you only have one transformer in inventory tomorrow, you need to go put it here because there's a gap, right? You're sending electricity there, but it's not getting to the consumer. So that's really almost in practical terms and in very crude terms what we do.
And so in the electricity spectrum of players, you've got, correct me if I'm wrong here, we've got the producer, the transmission, and the distributor.
Correct.
So who do you work for then? Or do you work for all three?
We work primarily for the distributor.
Okay.
Right. So we're really focused on the last mile, right? So the generation, there are issues at every part of the chain. In generation, like you pointed out, 50% of the capacity is idle. The transmission has a lot of losses, but we think the biggest leakage or the biggest inefficiency is actually in the last mile, which is with the distribution companies. So that's really where we're focused.
And you've been working with the short form for the DISCOs, the distribution companies. You've been working for DISCOs for a little while now. What has your net result been? Like, how's your company seen the change as a result of you being there?
Sure. So, the net result has been, the distribution companies have what you call aggregate technical, commercial, and collection losses, ATC and C losses.
Okay.
That is the single most important metric that the distribution companies use, right? We work for one of the distribution discos we work for. Around about when we started, they were like close to 40% ATC and C losses. So that means 40 out of 100 units of electricity in their network were basically unaccounted for.
Just
right?
poof, vanished. They had no clue.
Correct. Yes. And now that is 19%, right? So again, I'd like to say, hey, that's all because of me. That's not true. But I'd also like to say that we are a major contributor to that, and I think that's true. So the goal is to plug that gap. I mean, if we can get from 40 to 19, 19 to 10, 10 to 5 or 6, I mean, we're probably never going to get to 0. That's just being realistic, right? Every incremental step is additional hours of electricity to the consumer, and it's less diesel being burned by that consumer. Because again, I mean, going from 40 to 20 means, I mean, in real terms, it means on average you've gone from maybe 7-8 hours a day to kind of 10 to 12 hours a day, right? So you're getting almost an extra 4 hours of electricity a day. In the developed world, we kind of struggle like, okay, I mean, that's really not a big deal, 4 hours of electricity. In Nigeria and in Africa, generally, it's a very big deal, right? And if you think of it in diesel terms, if you think of it in economic terms, in terms of the cost, it's massive, it's significant.
Absolutely. So there you are. You're a part of the solution that's adding 50% more uptime or awareness, not necessarily uptime, awareness of the losses. Right? Is that okay? So you're providing the disco with greater awareness of loss, so they're able to bill their clients more. They're able to account for their total invoice that they get from the distribution company. I like you said, I paid for 100 units. I'm only collecting revenue on 60 units. Does that then result in a different tariff, or do you think what's the net result other than uptime, or is there one?
There are multiple results. So one of it is, I mean, again, the most fundamental from the user, it depends on, so from the consumer's perspective, it's uptime, right? You have better availability, better consumer experience.
Yep.
From the utility's perspective, better consumer experience results in better revenue, because you used to have to pay for, I mean, you're paying for 100 units, you could only bill for 60, right? Now you can bill for 80, right? That's better revenue. Because you have that increased revenue, it's a vicious cycle. You have more, you're in less of financial distress, you're better able to reinvest in your grid network. If you're better able to reinvest in your grid network, then you can supply even more. And if you can supply even more, then your collection is better. Then you can, so it has a compounding effect.
Absolutely.
Right?
So walk me through, we'll call it a disco that says, we want to use you as part of our reinvestment, or use you from the process. We've seen the losses that you've gained for somebody else. We want to do that as well. Talk me through how you get involved from that day one to the extra dollar, as it were.
Absolutely. So two things we see. The first thing is, from the utilities perspective, the first pitch or value proposition is, we need to help you get visibility on your network. I mean, you can think of the network as a cluster, right? If it's a mess, it's just hard to kind of decipher what's going on, right? So the first value proposition is, let's help you declutter, right? Let's help you just basically sort out the mess so you can really see what's going on in your network. And by seeing, you can be more responsive, right? So that involves building software. It also involves just looking at your data, looking at how you're using information, right? We're fortunate, we live in a fortunate time where there's a ton of information, sometimes too much information, right? But sometimes the flip side of that is it can be overwhelming. So part of our process is to help sort that out and say, hey, look, what are the priorities? What are the key things you should be looking at, right? From looking at those priorities, we develop tools around those. We develop software. We build algorithms to say, okay, A connects to B, connects to C, connects to D. right? Here's the relationship. We'll build a software that basically has an algorithm that has all these flows. We then track, and then voila, you get a tool that shows you the visibility and tells you where the priorities are, where the bigger issues are, so that you can act. So it's a multifaceted approach. It does take a while. It's a little bit abstract because we're not coming in and saying, hey, here's our mousetrap, buy it, right? It's better. Yeah. We really say we work through, it's a process, right? And it's a process that starts from looking at decluttering, providing visibility, building tools to improve that visibility, building processes, right? Because again, if the processes aren't there, technology alone doesn't solve the problem, right? So building processes or redesigning processes, and underlying all of this is data. It's a ton of data, sorting out the data and the flow of data and making sense of it. That's really kind of how we approach things.
So you are very much somebody that is collecting data that already exists, but providing a way for somebody to get answers from that data.
Correct.
Yeah. Fascinating. What is, call it, the market for that data? I mean, I would think in something like Nigeria, you're collecting somebody's power usage. There's something very interesting. Forget privacy laws and all those kind of issues. The extra naira that's being collected, I know I said dollars before, I meant naira, that the utility has, whether it be for reinvestment or profit or dividends or however it wants to deal with that extra profit, that's up to them. But there's data there that can be very interesting.
Yeah. No, I think, again, Africa there are lots of issues, but then lots of opportunities, right? As a continent, I've said we're lucky to live in an age where there's a lot of data, but on a relative basis, Africa is still very data poor, right? And that poverty of data translates into so many things, right? It translates into the way our cities are developed, right? The way infrastructure is developed in our cities. Forget the commercial elements, for example, for a second, right? It is our hope, and again, for us, this is a journey, and we're at the early stage of the journey. It is our hope that as we get data and we use this data to kind of create insights, this data will be invaluable in improving lives, improving infrastructure, improving quality of life, improving even down to things like education and healthcare, right? Because there's a correlation between how much access you have to electricity. How do you have hospitals in areas where there's no access to electricity, right? In an age where kids are, coding and doing all sorts, how do you kind of have a proper education without that underlying infrastructure? So I think the data is a significant opportunity. And I think, like I said, it's the start of a journey. What we're starting with is the more fundamental piece, which is let's try and improve access in the process. There is data, but over time, there'll be an iterative process and that'll get refined. And that would feed into basically developing future African cities.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. The development of energy in Africa, as you well know, has been very impact-based, and the thoughts around impact are this community that is far away from the grid, let's get them energy. While there is something about that, I find it absolutely amazing and stunning how you are saying, but there's people on the grid that have a quality of life issue and that are part of what's going to propel Africa forward, and we need to deal with the things that they face.
No, absolutely. I think, and I don't want to get into my pet peeve. I think there are a lot of donor communities, even the DFIs that do a great job. But I think, and I think that 47% of Nigerians that don't have access, I actually think the number is lower, right?
Yeah.
I think they absolutely need access. but you have the nerve centers of the economy, right? If you take Nigeria, if you take Lagos, Port Harcourt, Abuja, Ibadan, Kano, right, include Enugu and a couple of other cities, you're talking probably 80-90% of the GDP of a country of 200 million people, right? I mean, I'm not an advocate for trickle-down economics, but if you solve that, the 90% of GDP, there is an impact for the people in the city. And frankly, there's a model where those people subsidize the people in the rural areas who have no access. That's been the model in the United States. It's been the model in Canada, right? It's been the model in the developed world, right? So there's almost this upside down approach that, oh, let's go to the villages and let's give, some lanterns and we'll do some small mini grid and maybe we'll give them TVs and fans. That's great, right? There's nothing wrong with that, right? It's great for those people to be able to watch satellite TV as well, right? But what economic activity is that generating? So for me, it's an upside down approach. And really the starting point has to be the nerve centers of the economy, which are the large urban areas. Renewables absolutely have to be part of the equation, right? But you've got to solve the grid because Lagos is 20 million people. Everybody's packed on top of each other, right? There's a space issue. The most efficient way to get a lot of power to 20 million people in a tiny constrained area is still through the grid. So we can't ignore that. We can't discard it and say, oh, well, it's going to be mini grids all over Lagos. That's just a pipe dream. It's not realistic, right? But it's a hard sell because, again, I feel like the developed world is hell-bent on this is the way and that's it. And it's almost no, right? But it's completely detached from the reality and practicality of what's actually happening in Africa and what the needs are.
The boots on the ground mindset that you have is something that's very needed in my world. To say that it's great to have, we'll call it people sitting in ivory towers saying, this is how we want to, invest and this is how we want to go forward. It's something different to have people that are actually experiencing life on the ground to be able to say, this is how we need to invest to help our economy, to help my brother and sister's economy, and be able to go from there.
No, absolutely. I think part of it comes down to what message and what sells, right? It's a lot cooler for someone to fly in from Calgary or New York or Toronto into Lagos and say, hey, look, I fly into Lagos, but I'm going to some rural area and here's a community. They were in the dark and all of a sudden I built a 20 kilowatt mini grid and now they can have 3 light bulbs each. It's cool. It's a much better story and it resonates a lot better than saying we're trying to fix a grid in Lagos or Port Harcourt or Abuja or wherever, right? And the money flows to what's more appealing, right? So you're seeing a lot more investment in that. Plus the fact that people look at the grid and say, oh, it's just too messy, it's too complex, right? At least when we go to the rural areas, we're starting from scratch. So we're going to build our mini grid and we're just going to run the line and there's going to be, right? Yep. So people almost don't want to tackle the complex problem. The complex problem isn't that cool, right? And then because of it, it just gets neglected. But at the same time, we talk about climate issues. So it's like really? This is where, like I said, you gave the statistics. 78% of people, right? Yep. 78% of 200 million people or whatever, do the math, burning diesel 12 hours a day. That's astounding that we've got to fix that. But someone's got to just pay attention to that.
I agree. And it's like many problems. It's easy to solve the cool thing than the messy one, right?
Absolutely. And again, it's not saying, you have structural issues, you have regulatory issues. The discos used to be government owned in Nigeria, and it's complex. It's tough to deal with, but we can't just turn our backs and just say, hey, it's too messy, right? Because if we can fix it, we solve a lot of these issues.
You have a passion. This passion is clearly evident, and it's from your gut. It's real. Where did it come from?
I've been very fortunate in my life in terms of just the opportunities I've had. I spent my early years in the UK and then moved to Nigeria. My dad moved there to actually did work for the government, start a horticultural research institute. I went to a great school in Nigeria, went to Air Force Military School, which, I mean, they picked 6 of us from every state across the country. And then I got the opportunity to go back to England, move to the US and see a lot. So I've been very fortunate, right? But for me, I want to see Africa develop. I want to see Nigeria develop, right? I've met a lot of incredibly smart Nigerians, some of the smartest people I've met, right? But it doesn't translate to the way society is and the economy is and infrastructure is in Nigeria. So for me, infrastructure development in Nigeria and broadly Africa has become a passion, right? I mean, and some of it is to sow seeds, some of it is to kind of make it happen. But I'm a big believer that we can't all just talk and write articles and just basically say, oh, look at what they're not doing, or this is how we should do it, right? Those who have the opportunity to should roll up their sleeves. And I happen to think for the people who solve the problem, there's a significant economic return as well. I don't know if it's right for me to say this in this climate, but I believe in capitalism, right? I mean, I think it's not a case of just donating and hope we Africa doesn't want to survive on handouts, right? We want to be self-sustaining. We want to have, kind of develop our own cities, our own countries, right? And we want to do it in a way that's sustainable. And to do that, it's not depending on donor or on handouts. It's trying to roll up our sleeves and do it ourselves. So that's my passion. So I can't solve all the problems. I mean, there's healthcare, there's education, there's a bunch of them. But for me, power is one that I've become familiar with. And this is my kind of thing. And like I said, I think we can make a big difference. I think we're doing a good job. But I think given the right resources and the right opportunities, I think there are lots of things we can do, and we can my goal is to get those people with less than 10 hours or 12 hours a day, get them to 12 to 14 to 16, right?
Yep.
Every step we make has a significant knock-on effect throughout every aspect of the economy, every single aspect. So, and I think it's doable. Right. So that's, again, that's my passion. And obviously Beacon is right in the line for that. And it's not always easy. Sometimes I ask myself why I'm doing this, but I enjoy it. I think so that those are the things that kind of come together. So long answer, but I think combination of wanting to see Africa develop, wanting to be part of the solution. The fact I think that by being part of the solution is a massive economic opportunity. And I think feel fortunate to have the opportunity to be part of this solution. I think all of those things kind of melt together to give me the drive and the passion to kind of keep pushing on with this.
And pushing on, you clearly have in the discussions we've had over the last few months. I'm always enjoy our discussions in the I just came back from Nigeria, or as we talk about the COVID protocols going back and forth and the different things that you have to observe. You have to have passion. That fire burns deep in your belly for you to frankly deal with airplanes. that in itself is the issue.
I hear you.
The Beacon Power Services now finds itself in a very interesting place. And you kind of went through a bit of this already from the perspective of the need that is Nigeria. But there is also a need that is without border. And do you see Beacon as a platform to be able to look at other jurisdictions, or do you see Beacon as something that is uniquely Nigerian?
No, the vision for Beacon is really Pan-African, right? Because if you look at the problems we have in Nigeria, and I say we in Nigeria, I refer to Nigeria, it's not uncommon across the continent, right? And it's just to varying degrees, right? You go to Ghana, you go to Sierra Leone, Liberia. Pretty much across even South Africa, which used to be, right? And still is to a large extent, right? ESCOM, but you're now having rolling blackouts and brownouts in South Africa, right? Different issues, right? So I see the problem and the issues being Pan-African, and the goal is to have a model for Africa, right? For example, when I talk about software or data analytics, you've got very large companies, global companies that do that in the US, in Canada, in Europe, right? But those people are not designing solutions for an African market, right? They have the US solution, the developed world solution, which is, we'll take it to Africa and we'll try and use it here, right? But often it just doesn't work. It's out of context, right? And it's not because the solutions are bad, right? The example I always give is, it's a bit of an absurd example. I probably told you this, right? It's like going to my grandma in the village, which is in a swampy part of Nigeria, and saying, hey, we're going to take a Ferrari, right? Ferrari is a great car, and you do 200 miles an hour. But guess what? It's the swamps. There are no roads, right? Yeah. So what do? Do you just take the Ferrari there and say, well, it's a great car. I gave you a great car. Shame you can't drive it, right? Or how do you build something around a swampy area so that people there can navigate and move around, right? Yeah. So I think from that perspective, I think there's a Pan-African opportunity, right, to take a uniquely African approach. And one of the things we pride ourselves in is where it's solutions for Africa by Africans, right? But Nigeria just happens to be a starting point. Being Nigerian, being familiar with Nigeria, and also the fact that from a stakeholder returns perspective, it also happens to be by far the largest country in terms of population and the largest economy. So it makes sense to have Nigeria and probably the most messy, right? So the idea is, let's start with the messier, biggest market, and as we solve that, the others would, relatively speaking, I'm not saying they're going to be a cakewalk, but they should, relatively, all things being equal, be easier. So that's kind of where we're going.
I am inspired by your view of Nigeria, and that you're okay with, we'll call it, rolling up your sleeves and getting dirty, because this isn't clean. I get it. Like, this is not a matter of, hey, let's just show up and look at the data. You've got heavy lifting that you've been doing and you have in front of you. And I'm quite inspired by the work that you're doing, and I look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks.
So, Bim, let's leave it at that, and perhaps we can have an update in sort of 6 months or a year, and hear how many more hours a day you've added to a community or to a region, and we can use that as a jumping off point for our next discussion.
Absolutely, that would be fantastic. No, I look forward to continuing the conversation. Like I said, I've enjoyed I've enjoyed our dialogue, and it's really interesting, and meeting someone who really understands what the issues are and has what I'd call a unique perspective or different perspective in terms of how to tackle the issues. So, really look forward to it, both through this forum and others. But thank you for the opportunity.
My pleasure, Bim. We'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for listening to Energy and Africa. I'm your host, Chris McLean. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass along our web address, stonechaircapital.com, to your friends and colleagues. And please, leave us a positive review on all your social platforms. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts and videos. Check us out on Twitter and LinkedIn. Details are all on the show notes. Join us next time for another edition of Energy and Africa.